This is Jim Hinckley, Kingman, Arizona. I'm the creator of Jim Hinckley's America and an author. I've been telling people where to go since 1990, and you're listening to the Route 66 podcast.
Route 66, Route 66, right along with the Route 66 podcast. For talks with people living and working along the Mother Road. The main street of America, from Chicago to LA, bore a heavy, heavy load. Route 66, Route 66. Sometimes historical paths aren't discovered until they're lost. Right along with the Route 66 podcast.
Hello and welcome aboard the Route 66 podcast, where talks with people living and working along the Mother Road. I'm your host, Anthony Arno, and I'd like to thank you for joining us here today on our journey. Today, I have a very popular Route 66 author, Jim Hinckley. Jim's written books such as Ghost Towns Along Route 66, 100 Things to Do on Route 66 Before You Die, Travel Route 66, and his most recent book is Murder and Mayhem on the Main Street of America, Tales from Bloody 66. Jim is based in Kingman, Arizona, and just has such a unique style when talking about his passion of Route 66, cars, and history. Please remember that the deadline for the Route 66 Podcast Scholarship Program is July 31st, and students in grades K to 12 can win up to $100 by submitting original work that both preserves and promotes Route 66. Examples might include submitting artwork, photographs, crafts, interviews, performance, music, videos, or any type of a multimedia presentation. Students are encouraged to listen to past episodes of the podcast for ideas and topics that may be of interest as a starting point. Students do not need to live along Route 66, but simply have an interest in promoting the Mother Road. Additional information can be found at route66podcast.com. Good luck to everyone. Listener feedback. On our last episode, we featured the Blue Whale and stories as told by Blaine Davis, whose father built the Blue Whale, and Linda Hobbs, manager of the Blue Whale gift shop. We heard from Jenna, who wrote about growing up in the Catoosa area and actually swimming at the Blue Whale as a kid back in the 70s and 80s. Jenna runs the Blue Whale Facebook group and posted my talk with Blaine and Linda, and that resulted in over 200 downloads within a 24-hour period. Thank you, Jenna. And last month, the topic to leave a message at route66podcast.com was to tell us about your favorite Route 66 t-shirt. Here's Phyllis Gray from Houston, Texas, telling about her favorite Route 66 t-shirt.
Hi, this is Phyllis Gray in Houston, Texas. My favorite Route 66 t-shirt is my Painted Desert Trading Post shirt. It was beautifully designed by Shelley Graham, who's a highly respected Route 66 writer and also part of the group that is taking care as guardians of this iconic holy grail of Route 66. So that's my favorite. Thank you.
Thank you, Phyllis. And we're going to send you a Route 66 face mask. In fact, Shelley Graham has been a longtime friend. I first connected with Shelley way back in 1999 when my students bicycled 2,000 miles in the back of the classroom aboard an exercise bike while learning all about Route 66. Shelley sent us a carousel of Route 66 slides, and she narrated them on a speakerphone in the classroom as I advanced each slide one by one. Now, this was way before our school had any type of online access. You could hear more about Shelley Graham in episode number 10, where she talks all about her book, Tales from the Coral Court Motel. The Coral Court was very much like the Blue Swallow, with attached garages, but it no longer exists today in the St. Louis suburb of Marlboro. My own favorite t-shirt has to be one of the retro ones, such as the Burma Shave logo. What I like most about it is that it's more than just a Route 66 shield. It grabs people's attention when I'm running about, and if someone stops to ask me about my t-shirt, you know I'm going to be chatting with them for a while. In fact, I recently met a shopper at a Costco here in New Jersey, and she was wearing a Route 66 t-shirt. And I always love asking them what was their favorite part of the journey. She didn't do the entire trip, but she remembered the Santa Monica Pier as being one of her most favorite parts of the trip. So for this month, I'd like you to either send me an email or leave me a message at Route66podcast.com on your favorite Route 66 souvenir. I'm looking on my bookcase right now at a bunch that have special meaning to me, and I look forward to sharing some of them with you in my next episode. And now, here's the trivia question for today's show. On the last episode, I spoke to Blaine Davis, whose father constructed the Blue Whale after retiring from the Tulsa Zoo as the director. The show was entertaining enough just hearing about life for Blaine, growing up with a father who was a former zoo director. In my talk with Blaine, he tells about one of the most unusual animals that he took home and treated as a pet. The question is, what type of animal was that? The answer after today's show. My guest today is more popular than I thought. A look on my bookcase reveals I own quite a few Route 66 books that he's written, and he's just released number 19, Murder and Mayhem on Route 66. I had the opportunity to meet him at various Route 66 gatherings for roadies through the years, but at the recent Miles of Possibility conference in Illinois, we both presented. It was during that time that I got to know both him and his wife, Judy, a little bit better. Please welcome to the Route 66 podcast, Jim Hinckley. Jim, thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, you bet, sir. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. Before we start, I just want to say again, thank you for sending a signed copy of your latest book to Marilyn Leisner. Marilyn was my guest on episode number 20. She's the mayor. She was the last mayor of Times Beach, a Route 66 town where dioxin was unknowingly spread on the dirt roads back in the 70s to keep the dust down. And as a result, the entire town was completely dismantled and buried into a landfill. All 2,000 residents had to move out. Their homes, their cars, and every other personal possession was buried into a specially created landfill. And I spent the day with Marilyn this past October, and I know she's listening. Hello, Marilyn, and thank you to your grandson for helping set up the Route 66 podcast on your iPad. So, Jim, what is your earliest memory of Route 66?
You know, it's an odd thing, but you can cue the Twilight Zone music at any point in the story, but for some reason, Route 66 has been front and center of pretty much everything in my life since at least 1959, and I really am that old. My earliest memory of Route 66 would probably be 1966, when we moved from Michigan out here to Arizona.
Now, you were born and raised on the East Coast, correct?
Well, I was raised everywhere. Folks like to tease me that I was potty trained on Route 66. I was born in North Carolina. We lived in Virginia. My dad was military.
Oh, okay, that explains that.
He was Coast Guard, Navy first, then Coast Guard, and then we went up to Michigan. He was on the Great Lakes. He's from Michigan, or was from Michigan. And then 1966, we moved out here to Arizona. And then later New Mexico, back to Michigan. And since the late 70s, I've been in Arizona, New Mexico pretty much full time. And
how did you land in Kingman?
You know, I'm not this imaginative, so I can't make this up. My dad, by the 1966, 65, 66, he'd had enough. Oceans, water, the whole thing. He'd been World War II Navy, then Coast Guard. He literally folded a map of the United States. There was no coast, no border. Threw a dart, Yucca, Arizona. And the closest place was Kingman. So just like in the Grapes of Wrath or the Beverly Hillbillies, we loaded up and headed west.
Is that a true story, Jim?
Yes. Yeah. He threw a dart at a map, Yucca, Arizona. He bought some property sight unseen in Arizona. It turned out to be a boondoggle, one of the great land boondoggles. But what was really interesting is he couldn't find the property he bought. So he bought a, quote, model home. It was a shell. And that happened to be on the pre-1952 alignment of Route 66.
Wow.
Out here below the Black Mountains near Oatman.
Now, you're a legitimate Route 66 author with 19 books under your belt. What was the very first book you wrote?
The first book I wrote was an illustrated history of the Checkered Cab Manufacturing Company.
And what year was that, Jim?
2002, I believe it was.
Now, they say, as a podcaster, they say when you go back and listen to your early episodes, you cringe. As an author, what goes through your mind when you pick up the copy of your first boc?
Oh, everything I do, I'm very critical of, more so than anyone else. And I always look at it and go, gosh, was I really that crazy? Was I really that silly? I find ways to improve with everything. It was a embryonic attempt. I've been writing professionally since 1990, and I've always found other ways to make money to support my writing habit because there's not a lot of money in writing. But from the inception, that's just like with the Checker book, I seem to always walk into opportunities to write.
And what is your background, your schooling in, Jim?
Well, I graduated high school by the skin of my teeth, largely because I got into a trade school situation. That's pretty much all the education I've got. Everything else has been learn as I go. I've been a devout reader. I still try to read at least 2 books a month on a wide array of subjects.
So what's the latest book you've read?
I'm finishing up right now a book. Let's see, I have the title right here. Defying Hitler.
Oh.
The Germans who resisted Nazi rule.
Wow, very interesting. Yeah, I know I did an earlier episode number 13 of the podcast, of Fort Reno. Are you familiar with the history of Fort Reno, the POW camp?
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah, it's the only place that has an official German and Italian military cemetery.
Yeah. And the person I interviewed spoke about how about 10 years ago they exhumed the body of an Italian soldier and they returned his remains back home to Italy. Now, Jim, you've written quite a few Route 66 books. Route 66 Road Signs, Route 66 America's Small Town, Route 66 Treasures, Backroads, Ghost Towns, the Encyclopedia. Do you have a favorite Route 66 book that you've written?
Yes, it's always going to. My favorite book that I've written will always be the last one I finished. So in this case, it would be Murder and Mayhem on the Main Street of America, Tales from Bloody 66.
And what prompted you to write that particular book, which really shows the darker side of the road?
Well, it goes back to what we were talking about. I've always liked to add depth and context to a subject. And we have a tendency to see Route 66 in the context of neon and tail fins. And it was so much more than that. It was literally the Main Street of America. And I've always enjoyed doing that. Even when I was writing for Cars and Parts, I did a column called The Independent Thinker. And it was the same thing. I wrote about common things, but I wanted to add depth and context.
And from your book, what would be a story you could tell us, maybe of the bloodiest story of them all?
Well, one of the ones that intrigued me, I don't know if it was the bloodiest, but one of the most fascinating, and I don't have a copy of the book right in front of me, and I do apologize, but 1937, a gentleman, he must have had a little bit of money. He managed a coal company in East St. Louis. And it was their tradition, he and his wife and another couple, they would every year take a holiday, New Orleans or Virginia, someplace they would take a big trip. In this particular year, they were going out to the exposition in San Diego, wanted to see the new Boulder Dam, Hoover Dam. And they left East St. Louis, traveled Route 66, sent postcards all along their stops, different things of that nature. They made a short detour from Tucumcari down to Vaughan, New Mexico, and disappeared. Were never seen again. The story became very fascinating on many, many levels. The FBI got involved, and they did research. A lot of unconfirmed sightings, Santa Fe, Albuquerque, but they never were seen. Their car turned up several months later. It was a Nash, a 28 Nash, turned up several months later, badly damaged in Houston, Texas. Some of their luggage was found burnt in the Nob Hill district of Albuquerque, and the rest of their luggage turned up around El Paso, Texas. But one of the aspects of the story that I found very fascinating was an interview with the FBI agent who had investigated this case, and he said it was a story written on his retirement. And he said this case really bothered him. The FBI had put together a file almost 10 feet high on this investigation. And he always was bothered that he was never able to solve this. But he said what was really intriguing, they were burdened by the fact that they were investigating about a dozen identical cases along the Route 66 corridor in Arizona and New Mexico between 1935 and 1938.
Yeah, you have that story. You have stories from Edmond, Glen Rio, and Tulsa, all in your latest book, Murder and Mayhem, along Route 66. I think my favorite is Ghost Towns of Route 66. That's a great coffee table piece, and we keep it on the table down at the Shore House in Wildwood, New Jersey. And I always get tickled when I see that people have looked at it during the rental season and wonder what they must think about this highway and why is this book on a coffee table 1,000 miles away from the nearest point of Route 66.
Well, ghost towns are interesting. I don't know where this comes from exactly. Maybe it's growing up as kids and we watch Indiana Jones or stories of King Tut's tomb. But ghost towns just fascinate people. So I was intrigued by the idea there again when the publisher approached me. What happens if we link something as popular as Route 66 with ghost towns? And the ghost towns on Route 66, I found, they're very interesting. They're very unique. Some of them are very old, but yet they're products of the modern era. A great example would be San Jose on the pre-1936 alignment of Route 66 in New Mexico. Here's a little faded town, farming village on the Pecos River that has a church that has cast its shadow on the Santa Fe Trail, the National Old Trails Road, and Route 66. And yet the town survived into the modern era, but it was the bypass of Route 66 that proves to be the death knell for the little community.
And then your other book, another favorite, 100 Things to Do on 66 Before You Die. Tell us how that's arranged. How is that written?
Well, it's written. It was just a simple, basically a pocket book. The publisher had asked me to share some of my favorite places on Route 66. My disappointment was he only limited me to 100. So I share museums, some of my favorite restaurants, my favorite places to see on Route 66, and it's just difficult to do that being limited to only 100.
All right, so let's look at the book. Whatever comes to mind, just shoot it off the top of your head. Museums.
Well, museums, we have the world's only electric vehicle museum is on Route 66. It's in Kingman, Arizona, in the Powerhouse Visitor Center. The J.M. Davis Firearms Museum in Claremore, Oklahoma. You know, that has got to be one of the most intriguing museums. Even if you're not a person that's obsessed with guns, it's just fascinating. History of firearms all the way back to 14th century Chinese hand cannons. And then mixed in with that is a staggering collection of 19th century music boxes, John Wayne film memorabilia, and then for the macabre, or the people with a really dark interest, they have a collection of nooses and hoods that were used in famous executions.
Wow. And where is that again, Jim?
Claremore, Oklahoma.
Next category, restaurants.
Oh, boy, food. Since you saw me, you know that I like food, you can tell, especially good pie. Grand Canyon Caverns out here in Arizona has some of the greatest pie that you can find. But Route 66 is diverse, and it's changed. It's always been about evolution. A great restaurant I like in Pasadena is the Hyder Baba. It's an authentic Persian cafe. In Chicago, you have the Berghof, a really nice, authentic German restaurant, the oldest continuously operated restaurant on Route 66, dating to about 1898.
Motels.
Okay. The Saga Motor Hotel, Pasadena, California, is really fantastic. That's a pure 1950s time capsule, complete with the towering palm trees and swimming pool. Of course, the Blue Swallow is a classic. The Wagon Wheel Motel in Cuba, Missouri, that is a really neat one, but I'm really partial to Cuba in general. The whole town fascinates me, but the Wagon Wheel is really neat on many levels.
And both guests here on the podcast, the Wagon Wheel, and we just released the Blue Swallow. Yeah. Photo stops.
Oh, well, Devil's Elbow would be a good one. The Painted Desert Trading Post, Grand Canyon Caverns, Sick Greaves Pass in western Arizona, going up towards Oatman down that direction. That's extraordinary. I don't think Stevie Wonder or a one-eyed blind man could take a bad photograph out there. It's just absolutely stunning.
And the last category from the book, must-see attractions.
Oh, there again, I'm partial to Grand Canyon Caverns. I keep bringing that up a lot. That's a lot of fun. You can do wheelchair-accessible tours, actual spelunking. They have a motel room in the caverns, as well as a restaurant. I'm kind of like, say, partial to the desert Southwest. Almost everything Route 66 in New Mexico is a photo opportunity. You go up around Glorieta Pass, the old Pigeon Ranch is a great photo stop. You get out around the Red Rock country of Gallup and Grants, New Mexico. Absolutely beautiful. Quinero Canyon, the old Quinero Canyon Bridge is a sight to see. Two Guns is very, very interesting.
And tell my listeners what spelunking is.
Underground exploration. Put on your overalls, get the helmet, and grease yourself up. Be prepared to slide through some tight spots and see things that most people don't see.
And on the podcast, episode number 17, we had Merrimack Caverns. Lester Dill talk all about the history of the caverns on Route 66.
Yeah, Merrimack is a neat stop. And Merrimack is a great blending. It's a perfect quintessential Route 66 roadside attraction, but it's also got natural beauty.
Absolutely.
And some historic connections as well.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, you also have a book out on side trips off of Route 66. Is that correct?
Yeah, that was an older book I did, Back Roads of Route 66. And what I tried to do, and I'd like to expand on that, I've tried to get the publisher interested in that. You can, if we become myopic and just see Route 66, that's all fine and dandy. But with the shortest of detours, you can really dramatically enhance the Route 66 experience. And it's not sacrilege to do that. The U.S. Highway 66 Association back in the 50s had a campaign here in Arizona they had billboards showing the things you could see off of Route 66, like Sedona and the Grand Canyon.
How far off do you think the average traveler is willing to venture off Route 66?
Well, here in the Southwest, quite a ways, a couple hundred miles sometimes. Monument Valley is just a popular stop for Route 66 enthusiasts, especially from overseas. And that's about, just a little over 100 miles off Route 66.
Yeah, I was in Monument Valley this past summer, actually, for a STEM class I was taking, and researching the Navajo code talkers.
Very interesting. I'd like to keep the detours. If I was to do another book, it would be probably 30 miles off Route 66, 30 to 40 miles. And you can just, there's just astounding things within 30 or 40 miles of Route 66.
Jim, you give many presentations on Route 66 as a speaker. What are the most popular topics that people ask you to talk about?
Well, two things. The travel, Route 66, how do you plan a trip? What was there to see? And the other is the history. And I try to blend the two, and that's one reason I got into all this writing in the first place. But trying to portray Route 66 as a string of living time capsules, to show it as a bridge that connects the past, the present, and the future.
And what's the one thing most people do not know about 66 that you like to share with them?
I always like to hit them with a bombshell at the end of my presentations, especially people who are not really familiar with Route 66. But the most amazing thing is that Route 66 doesn't exist.
Yeah. I tell them that too, and it's not the first highway in America. It's not the longest, but it's definitely the most storied, celebrated highway in the world.
Oh, yeah. It's not our most historic, most scenic. It's not our first, but it's always had the best press and publicity from its very inception. And as a result, it has, a long time ago, it morphed into far more than a highway.
What do you think gave it its first push, in the early part of the history of the highway? Was it the Bunyan Derby? Was it Steinbeck writing about it? Or was it just, the road west?
Well, we can go back even a little further than that. Here in the Southwest, especially from Las Vegas, New Mexico, to the California coast, the National Old Trails Road, Judge Lowe in 1913 started pushing marketing for that as the Main Street of America. And we had, because of its proximity to the Southwest through the Painted Desert, the Petrified Forest, the Grand Canyon, just as with Route 66, that became a primary tourist highway, tourist corridor. Edsel Ford came out in 1915 with his college buddies. In that year, the Panama Pacific Exposition in California, more than 20,000 people attended that event from outside the state, and they arrived by automobile. And about 75% of them traveled the National Old Trails Road. And then if you fast forward, when Route 66 came in 1926, in 1927, Cyrus Avery and some visionary businessmen started the U.S. Highway 66 Association. And one of the first things they did was a marketing campaign billing Route 66 as the Main Street of America. And then you had the Bunyan Derby. And 1932 was the Los Angeles Olympics. And the U.S. Highway 66 Association started a huge marketing campaign that Route 66 was the best route to see the country and to drive to Los Angeles. And then, of course, the book and the movie, Grapes of Wrath.
Yeah.
The song, the TV show, Lucille Ball, Lucy and Desi on their TV program. They had a 3-part episode where they drove to California, and it was on Route 66, visiting Albuquerque and, all these different stops.
I'll have to check that out. I didn't know about that one. I Love Lucy. Wow.
I got to be honest, being from back east and then moving out here to Arizona, especially out in the desert along Route 66 below Oatman, I thought this was the place they warned me about in Sunday school. And my first paying job was at Ed's Camp. I worked for Old Man Edgerton.
Really?
Up there.
Wow, I didn't know that.
And I learned to ride a bicycle on that stretch of road. I learned to drive on that old abandoned alignment. I learned to drive trucks. Never did I think it would take me where it's taken me. And I'm still up in the air, but the festival this year is in Zlin. It's an international Route 66 festival, and I've been asked to speak there as well as host and moderate a live stream question and answer session from the event. But
and how many people turn out to these events?
Oh my gosh, it's astounding. Zlin, there's a reason they don't give Zlin away on game shows. You can't get there. Zlin is a very fascinating town. It's a large city. But the nearest transportation is about 100 miles. Vienna would probably be one of the closest, or Bratislava, Slovakia. But estimated attendance was just over 20,000 people from 10 countries.
Holy cow.
And it was so surreal. It was like an American event. They had ZZ Top tribute band, and when the bands weren't playing, they were playing Hank Williams music. It was just like being in an American event. Except I couldn't understand anybody, couldn't read anything, and had no idea what in the hell I was eating. But it was all good.
Now, these events, are they people who hopefully want to come to see Route 66, or are they people that realize this is probably the closest I'm going to get, and they just heard about 66 and they're curious?
No, it's a dream. I mean, it's astounding. And Route 66 has come to represent... I had a fellow in the Czech Republic speak on this, and it really struck me. He was talking about growing up in a communist country listening to Radio Free America, watching bootleg copies of Easy Rider, things of that nature. And he said Route 66, the open road, for his generation, came to symbolize America as the Statue of Liberty did for a previous generation. It represented freedom. And that really, really struck a chord. But Route 66 is now viewed as the quintessential American experience. They see it as America personified.
So, Jim, let's bring it closer to home. If a traveler is visiting Kingman, Arizona, what is there for them to see and do in the area in Kingman?
Kingman's one of those places, it's immortalized, of course, in the song, Get Your Kicks on Route 66. But it's the running joke in Kingman is that the town was founded by people who stopped and waited for the wind to quit blowing, and everybody else just broke down here. But Kingman is one of those amazing places. Within 60 miles of Kingman, anything and everything you would want is here. We have the only road where you can drive to the bottom of the Grand Canyon. We're 70 miles from the Grand Canyon Skywalk. 15 miles from Kingman is Wallapai Mountain Park, and a lodge and cabins, hiking trails, and it's like being in Williams, Arizona. It's all pine forested with elk in the parking lot. 15 degrees cooler summer and winter than Kingman. You drive 20, 30 miles the other way down towards the Colorado River Valley. Beautiful, scenic. It's not hell, but if you squint hard during the summer, you can see it. Temperatures are often over 120 degrees. We have the caverns, like I say. We have whitewater rafting, railroad history, World War II aviation history. A lot from the Kingman Army Airfield is still here. We have the world's only electric vehicle museum, award-winning microbreweries. It's anything a person could want within, like I say, just 60 miles of Kingman.
And when I was there, I did visit the powerhouse. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, the powerhouse is the oldest reinforced concrete structure in Arizona dating back to 1907. And it supplied, just as the name implies, it was the powerhouse, the generation station for the entire area of northwestern Arizona until Hoover Dam went online in the 1930s. And then it went through a period where it was used for storage, equipment storage, all kinds of different things, recycling center. And a nonprofit was formed about 30 years ago now, and created the Route 66 Museum and the City of Kingman Visitor Center. And it's a really, really great stop. We have a nice Route 66 museum upstairs, the embryonic electric vehicle museum down below, and it's also the offices and headquarters for the historic Route 66 Association of Arizona.
Now tell me if I'm off here. Is the main street through Kingman Andy Devine Highway? Who was Andy Devine?
Well, Andy Devine, boy, he was a character actor. Known for a real gruff, gravelly voice, and he was prolific. Literally, somewhere close to 1,000 movies as a character actor, all the way from the 1920s, well up into the late 60s, early 70s. He had his own TV show for a while, Andy's Gang. He was involved, played in movies with John Wayne. He had radio programs he was involved with. He was the voice for Friar Tuck in the animated movie Robin Hood by Walt Disney. He was the gruff little sheriff in Mad, Mad, Mad World. He was a bit player, but he was famous. And Andy Devine Avenue, which is Route 66 in Kingman, was originally Front Street. And then in an episode of This Is Your Life in 1955, they had a special program live from Kingman where they renamed the street Andy Devine Avenue.
So, Jim, in Kingman, what is the support like for Route 66?
That's a touchy subject. It's anemic. It's really surprising. There's only a handful of communities on Route 66 that really grasp the potential for economic development, for historic preservation. All of these things are in Kingman. We have a strong grassroots, but the city has been somewhat slow to really grasp this. And the reference you made, I was very honored by this, but it was the vice mayor of Kingman, last year, he announced he was going to dedicate his salary to my promotional efforts of the Kingman area.
That's very generous of him.
I was very honored and very humbled by that, yes.
Now, your website is gigantic with a lot of resources for our listeners. Tell us a little bit about the website and what is Jim Hinckley's America?
Well, it started out simple enough. I'm basically modern Amish. For me, the world ended somewhere around the Model A Ford. That's where I'm most comfortable with technologies. But I decided to tinker with things to see if I could find a way to better sell books. Because writing is at best, it's a exercise in starvation. To me, the meaning of a successful writer is someone that's the only thing you do for a living, and you can still afford to eat every second day. And so I started tinkering with this, and I found an interest in. So I developed Jim Hinckley's America as a travel brand, and my slogan, telling people where to go since 1990. Route 66 is the primary, but it's also about America. It's about travel. And since then, I've expanded Jim Hinckley's America. I do an audio podcast, small one, 5 minutes with Jim. This week, the Sunday program was on the Desert Classic, the Cactus Derby automobile races from 1908 to 1914. And then I have coffee with Jim on Saturday mornings, just a live stream, half-hour interactive program. And I recently just launched a little bit rough. I have a tendency to experiment with things, and my fans and followers are gracious enough to understand that I'm willing to, tinker with things and share the adventure, if you will. And then I started doing online my presentations that I've been making internationally. I'm going to be moving those to an online format, live stream with questions and answers.
So you're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. How do you manage all of those social channels?
It's like juggling cats and chainsaws. They just go together. One leads to the other, and you just have to. And I challenge, older people like myself and others. You can teach an old dog new tricks, and your life is a lot more interesting if you embrace things. If you accept the challenges of trying to learn to do these things. I didn't even own a cell phone until six years or so ago.
Wow.
And I joke about being modern Amish, and my mom said that I was born in 90, but the oldest vehicle I've ever had was a 1915 Dodge. And then for a short period of time, that was the only vehicle I had to get back and forth to work. When my dear wife and I were dating, I'd come in off the ranch. I had a 46 GMC pickup, and we double dated in a 26 Ford touring car. And I've just always been fascinated with the old stuff, but you can blend the two with use of modern technologies.
Now, what form of social media is the most popular for Route 66 and Jim Hinckley's America?
Facebook.
Definitely Facebook.
Yeah, most definitely.
Now, behind every successful individual is usually a supportive cheerleader. And for you, it's your wife, Judy. Tell us a little bit about her.
Oh, Judy's been more than my cheerleader. She's the president and sometimes the only member of my fan club. And she's stuck with me through thick and thick. And I just don't know what I'd do without her support and encouragement. And everything I've done is because she's encouraged and moved. My first writing endeavors in 1990, I always loved books, thought about writing, but never really did it. And it was her encouragement that started me down the road to writing.
Now, you mentioned earlier that you're teaching a course. Tell us about that before we started recording today.
Well, I developed a series of classes. Going back to what you were talking about, the communities not understanding the opportunities in Route 66 for economic development, for building cooperative partnerships, for historic preservation. So I sold Mojave Community College on the idea of some community education programs that would foster greater awareness of Route 66 history, community history, And my goal was to tailor-make these for other communities, take these into other communities, which is easy enough. What the classes focus on, like here in Kingman, the evolution of the romanticized image of the Southwest, how that plays into Route 66 tourism, past, present, and future. And I try to give people not only the information, but the tools to build strong grassroots initiatives that will foster development of cooperative partnerships within the community.
Now, people like yourself, Michael Wallace, Shelley Graham, have done an incredible service to promote Route 66. But who would you say is a younger advocate for Route 66 that will hopefully take the torch once it's passed down to them?
Oh, we've got a few. Reese Martin out of Oklahoma and his wife Samantha. Wonderful people, very dynamic, very passionate, deeply involved. Rich Denkla in Missouri and his family would be just two great examples.
Absolutely. Do the locals in Kingman know, especially the younger generation, do they realize the importance of Route 66, or is it just something that they're totally oblivious to?
It's somewhere in between. Our younger people as a whole are woefully ignorant of history in general, and Route 66 is part of that. One of the projects that I've tinkered with just once or twice, but I'd like to do sometime, is develop some classes for high schools about Route 66, the history, and there again, what it means to your community.
What other non-Route 66 things are you working on, Jim?
Well, automotive history, that's always been the center point of everything I've done. It's a long story, complicated thing, but my family had no interest in history. And as a kid, my father, he passed away in January. He was born and died in the same house on Hinckley Boulevard in Jackson, Michigan.
Really?
And when I was a kid, there was a picture of my grandfather and Henry Ford on the front porch of the house. And I'd ask my grandmother about it, and she'd go, I don't know. Fred and Henry did things.
Really?
That's the only answer I ever got, my dad or my grandmother. My grandfather was born in 1865, and so he was 63 when my dad was born. So I never knew the man, and it was my quest to know more about him that led me into writing and automotive history and an interest. And I found over the years, I still find things like I just recently learned that in 1898, my grandfather invented and patented the coaster brake for the bicycle.
Really? Wow.
I found he was a machinist for David Buick in 1900. But for me, an original vehicle, that is as close to time travel as we're going to get. Find yourself a stretch of Route 66 and drive a 1930 Ford down that road. That's as close as you're going to get to time travel. And so most of my early writing started from that. My first feature I wrote was for Special Interest Autos by Hemmings Motor News. One of the most fulfilling, if it wasn't the most profitable, one of the most fulfilling writing jobs I've had, I was associate editor for Cars and Parts magazine until they went out of business. And I wrote a feature called The Independent Thinker. And I profiled obscure people you've never heard of that transformed the auto industry. But I'll give you one example of just an incredible story. And I received more fan mail over this one particular story I wrote than anything I've done since. The fellow who invented cruise control, he was a fellow named Ralph Teeter, an extraordinary man. He perfected a gyroscope mechanism for World War I torpedoes, perfected the electric razor. He and a cousin built an automobile from scrap parts and drove it to school when they were like 12.
Wow.
But the most amazing thing about Mr. Teeter, he'd been playing in his father's machine shop as a child and suffered a debilitating accident. He was blind since age 5.
Wow. Incredible.
And he would envision all of these things in his mind and dictate them how they should work.
Now, you have a book called The Big Book of Car Culture. What is that one about?
Oh, to borrow a line from the old Seinfeld TV show, the big book about nothing. I wrote about the history of highway striping and traffic lights,
Really?
the history of Earl Schreiber, Route 66, roadside attractions, the history of automotive air conditioning, just all kinds of just obscure things.
And how did you connect with Jay Leno? Tell us about that experience.
This is the way my whole life works. I stumble into these things. I was associate editor, like, say, for Cars and Parts magazine, and I never would go to Los Angeles. I gave that up when I was after I quit truck driving. I no more Los Angeles. I just couldn't stand it. I'd go as far as Victimville or Hysteria, better known as Victorville and Hesperia, California, but I wouldn't go over the Cajon. And I had written a big book of car culture, and at that time I was working as a rental agent at a rental car company. And a fellow broke down here in Kingman, and the owner of the company sold my books at the counter. Now, there's a bookstore in California called, in Burbank on Magnolia Boulevard. It's Auto Books, Aero Books. Just an amazing bookstore. New and used books all the way back into the teens and earlier. And they've been there since 1953. Well, this gentleman comes in, buys a book, the big book of car culture, and comes back a couple days later, and he says, this is an amazing book. Do you know if they sell this at Auto Books, Aero Books? I knew of the store, but I'd never been there. And he says, well, let me find out. Turns out the owner, Tina Van Kuren, is his neighbor. So he calls her up, he talks to her, and he says, yeah, she'd like to talk to you.
Wow.
And so I talked to her on the phone, and she says, we'd love to have you over for a book signing sometime. And I thought, well, God bless, great. The store, every Saturday, they have a book signing and a cruise-in. People just show up with old cars, and it's a small store. But because it's a kind of a wealthier area, they might be a 62 Maserati out front or a Model T,
Wow.
and the bakery brings over goods. But their book signing and their cruise-in on Saturdays, she schedules months in advance, and it was the big people, Carol Shelby, this kind of thing, you know. So I was really honored, but I didn't expect I'd get anything. About 2 months later, she calls me up on a Wednesday. She said, this is very short notice. I've had a cancellation. Would you be able to do a book signing on this coming Saturday? So I jump at the opportunity. I suck it up, decide I'm going to survive Los Angeles metropolitan area, even though it has more than 3 stoplights. The day I'm getting ready to leave, that Friday, Brad Bowling, the editor of the magazine, calls me up and says, how close are you to El Segundo, California? And I says, well, it's over by L.A. I'm heading over there this weekend. There's a new museum opening. Would you want to cover the opening of that museum? It opened a few weeks ago, but could you cover this museum for us? So, and he says, well, I've got you on the phone. I also would like sometime in the next month if you could do an article on the Doble. It was a really revolutionary steam car. So I do some quick research on the Doble before I leave. Much to my surprise, I find out that there's about 25 Dobles in the world. Jay Leno just purchased one. And just as a fluke, I find out that Jay Leno is such a regular at those cruise-ins in Burbank at this bookstore that even though they're limited parking, they reserve a space out front for him.
Oh.
So in my fevered imagination, I think I don't believe in the Easter Bunny, but this is amazing. I don't see this as a coincidence. So I envision doing a book signing, meeting Jay Leno, and getting to ride in this Doble, this rare steam car. I sign books, busy crowd, meet all kinds of interesting people from Walt Disney Studios, everything with their vintage cars. No Jay Leno. Huh. I wait as long as I can and still make it to El Segundo. He doesn't show up. I sign a copy of Cars and Parts magazine, stick my business card in it, and said, sorry I missed you. I really wanted to talk to you about your Doble. I take off for El Segundo. 15 minutes after I left, Jay Leno shows up at the bookstore driving his new Doble steam car. And we get back from California, and my wife checks the messages on the phone, and she says, I don't think this is a joke. You might want to hear this. And it was Jay Leno. I'm really sorry I missed you. Thanks for the magazine.
Wow.
That was it.
What a story.
And then I don't know, probably 6 months later, I get a call from his producer. He was doing a book club show on his Jay Leno channel, and it was interviews in his garage. And he says, Jay would like to know if you'd like to come over and do an interview on the big book of car culture, as well as your book on Checker. So it takes us another 3 months to coordinate our schedule before I can get over there to Jay's garage. And the other part of the story that's really great, the big book of car culture, it took the bronze medal at the International Automotive Media Awards.
Wow.
But it sold poorly. And part of that was my fault. I did not know at that time, that was my second book, I did not know my role in promoting. I didn't realize that the publishers really, they don't. So I get really excited. I knew the book hadn't sold. I call the publisher. I says, I know the book hasn't sold well, but I just walked into an incredible promotional opportunity for this book. And the response was, gosh, I wish that would have been 6 weeks ago. We just decided not to reprint, and we've remanded all copies to Sam's Club.
Wow.
So now I have an interview with Jay Leno to promote a book that's no longer going to be in publication.
Now, is that interview available anywhere online, that footage?
I'm not sure. I haven't been able to find it. That program's been gone for quite a while, and so I don't think so.
And what was the name of that show again?
It was Jay Leno's Garage. It was a precursor to Jay Leno's Garage. It was his book club.
What does Route 66 mean to you before we say goodbye?
Route 66 is, for me personally, it's like a good pair of shoes or a well-worn, a comfortable saddle. It's like an old friend, and it's just. If I can get away with it, if I'm not in a push, I never drive the interstate. I always try to drive Route 66. It's really where the non-generic world still lives.
Jim, what's next on your bucket list?
Well, everything I had on the bucket list has been derailed with the current situation. So I'm open for suggestions. I guess right now, survival of the apocalypse. And after that, more European adventures. I'd like to get a publisher interested in US 6. I've been pushing that idea for quite a while. And I want to develop these educational programs and take them into communities. Just before this situation came up, I was working with Route 66 Crossroads, a nonprofit organization that was developed to develop community educational initiatives. And I'd like to move forward with the educational programs.
Now, I don't even know. Do the other highways, like outside my front door is the Lincoln Highway, do they have books written about them? Are they as popular? And they're not as popular, but do people gather around them the way they do for 66?
Yes, most definitely. Lincoln Highway has a strong following. The Jefferson Highway has a strong following. The Dixie Highway, but they just don't have the popularity. They don't have the. They've never had the press that Route 66 has had.
Yeah. But
they're all fascinating highways. I mentioned US 6. If you want to look up a very interesting, strange, odd highway, it's US 6. Do you remember the old commercial of the egg in the frying pan? This is your brain on drugs.
Cooking it, yes.
Well, that's Route 6 is almost like this is your highway designed by people on drugs. It goes nowhere on purpose. It was the longest highway in the United States, stretching from the tip of Cape Cod all the way to Long Beach, California. And it's the highest highway over Loveland Pass, over 12,000 feet in the mountains. It crosses the worst of the Nevada deserts. And what I mean by not going anywhere, it misses Chicago by like 20 miles. And it goes through the worst of Nevada into Utah, misses Salt Lake City by about 30 miles. It's the only U.S. highway to run north and south, east and west.
It's all over the place.
Yeah, and it was the last U.S. highway to be fully paved. There's a section near the Arizona-Nevada border that was not paved until 1952.
Wow. Jim, how can our listeners get in touch with you?
Through JimHinckley'sAmerica.com.
Well, Jim, thank you so much for joining me today, and also thank you to your wife, Judy, for supporting all the work you do to promote the road.
Thank you, sir.
That was Jim Hinckley from Kingman, Arizona, who's been telling people where to go. I'll have links for Jim's website, books, video, and everything else at Route66podcast.com. And now, the trivia question. What was one of the most unusual residents at the zoo that the Davis family had as a pet at home? A pet bobcat. And that bobcat followed Blaine everywhere he went, and people would do a double take thinking it was just a large cat, but he had a bobcat in tow. Next time on the podcast, Route 66 goes to the circus. That's right, the Route 66 connection to the Bloomington Normal Circus will be featured in the next show. Not only is the Bloomington Normal, Illinois area home to former aerial circus performers, but it's also home to the oldest college circus troupe in the U.S., the Gamma Phi Circus. So I'm going to play for you clips from 3 different guests that will be featured next time on the show. Maureen Brunsdale wrote the book The Bloomington Normal Circus Legacy. Marcus Allowen is the current director of the Gamma Phi Circus at ISU. And Wayne Wright is a human cannonball who's been shot out of a cannon more times than you can imagine as he traveled around the world as a circus performer, and later he directed the Gamma Phi Circus. Here's a listen.
The trapeze had been around for a while as an exercise apparatus, but never had it been employed in circuses or entertainment until Jules Leotard. We know that name because of leotards. People wear leotards to this day, but Jules Leotard invented trapeze in France earlier, and the trapeze as an entertainment apparatus made the leap from Europe to America, and I.P. Fell installed a trapeze in his brand new gym in the early 1870s in downtown Bloomington. Well, when he did that gym lured boys from around the community to become members, and were writing reviews of the performances that were held in that gymnasium to kind of drum up more business and an additional clientele.
Oh my goodness. Our trip to the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade was incredible. So we were welcomed by Macy's to bring 16 students. To my knowledge, we're the second circus to stop on the Star and perform in front of the cameras for, I believe this was the 93rd Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade. Well, we had been in conversation with them for over a year, and I had pretty much given all of it over to the artistic director because he had performed and been in the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade when he was with Big Apple Circus. And so he actually held that information and kept it a secret from me until our show in April of 2019. I had just given my thank you to the audience for coming. I handed the microphone over to Yvonne, and he made that announcement, which none of us knew. The students backstage didn't know. I had never heard before that point that we had been given the green light.
So a week later, they called me and asked me if I wanted to do the cannon.
And what did you say, Wayne?
I got butterflies and my hands started sweating on the phone.
Oh, my gosh.
But I went down to Nashville where the Shrine Circus was going on, and in the nighttime, during the daytime, we'd practice the cannon. So I spent a week learning it.
So tell us the story the very first time you launched out of a cannon. What was that like?
Well, the very first time practice, they pulled the cannon right up to the net, and you just literally stand on the barrel and jump into the net. And then they shoot you 10 feet, and then 20 feet, and then 40 feet up in the net, and they back the net up and do that process again, back it up again, do it a few more times. Pretty soon you're back about 80 feet, going 80 feet high, 110 mile an hour. And that's always scary.
Yeah.
It was always the closing act.
Oh.
The most, even when we had the Bowers Act and the Walinda Pyramids and stuff. It was the closing act.
That's the Route 66 Circus Connection in Bloomington Normal, Illinois, on the very next episode here on the podcast. Before I say goodbye, please remember to either leave me a voice message on our website about your favorite Route 66 souvenir at route66podcast.com, and you might win a Route 66 washable face mask. Or you can also send me an email at route66podcast@gmail.com. In addition, if you know anyone in grades K-12, please encourage them to submit a Route 66 podcast scholarship entry. The deadline is July 31st, 2020. Lastly, I'm looking forward to my travels in the eastern portion of the road this summer, and I'd love to meet you for a quick outdoor hello. You could reach out to me here at the podcast for a detailed schedule. Well, thank you for taking the journey with us here at the Route 66 podcast. I'm your host, Anthony Arno. Be well.